Hi class, this is your instructor, Skylar Huff. We have now gotten to the 28th chapter. We are now in the seed plants. As opposed to what you all just finished learning, you learned about how plants evolved. Plants began in the ocean, and then from those aquatic plants, meaning from those algal species, those photosynthetic aquatic beings, plants made the move to land. There were bryophytes. Thereafter, there were what I call those seedless vascular plants, known as the ferns and their allies, which evolved vascular tissues, xylem and phloem, and we're now, of course, to the first group of two seed plants, and we'll begin with the gymnosperms. So please do bear in mind that plants, they reproduce via spores, and when I state this, I'm referring primarily to, of course, those seedless plants, meaning they have that haploid cell that, of course, disperses. The spore I'm referring to is a haploid cell. So those spores disperse, they germinate, and produce the gametophyte generation. This is what we did as you all learned about the way in which the generations alternate, known as the alternation of generations, which is on your test. So, of course, although gymnosperms and angiosperms also produce spores, their primary means of reproduction and dispersal is by way of seeds. So this was that major evolutionary adaptation for life on land. So as I continue, it's that seed that can withstand, I guess I'll say, the rigors of life on land. So each seed contains within it A, an embryonic sporophyte, B, its nutritive tissue, and C, a protective multicellular seed coat. Seeds, they do develop from the fertilized egg, the female gametophyte, and its associated tissues. So of course, here in this chapter being the 28th chapter, we have two groups of seed plants. They're known as the angiosperms and gymnosperms. We'll begin, of course, by way of the gymnosperms. Those are, of course, those plants that have the naked seeds, and it's in the name, gymnosperm. And of course, the second of two will be the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. The flowering plants, of course, exhibit, I say, the greatest evolutionary complexity of the land plants, and of course dominate, I say, most terrestrial environments. So seed plants, here we are. Keeping in mind, as we are now with seeds, what I'll say about seeds is that seeds are reproductively superior to spores for a number of reasons. The first reason I would say is a seed is further along in its development. And of course, as it is released, it can survive on its own. That reminds me, I planted seeds just last week, corn seeds. I looked out there this morning, and I have, of course, germinating corn. Secondly, the seed contains a multicellular young plant with an embryonic root, stem, and one or more leaves that are already formed. Whereas a spore is nothing more than what I mentioned earlier, a single cell. Next, I'll say a seed contains an abundant food supply. Yes, even though you mentioned maybe or have heard of a mustard seed, well, even within a mustard seed, it has its very own food supply, and of course, an embryonic root, stem, and one or more leaves. And of course, after germination, the food that's stored within it nourishes that embryonic plant, meaning since it cannot go through the process of photosynthesis, that nourishment, of course, comes from the stored food reserves. So because a spore is a single cell, few food reserves are within. Thirdly, a seed is protected by that multicellular seed coat derived from integuments, such as, of course, you may have seen in, I guess I'll say, the lima bean, or even, of course, by way of an avocado. So let's get into that introduction to seed plants. So please keep in mind that the things we call seed plants yet and still, the seed plants yet and still alternate among, of course, those two generations, that haploid gametophyte and that diploid sporophyte generation. But do keep in mind, as you all saw with the seedless vascular plants, the seed plants have a dominant sporophyte generation, a dominant multicellular sporophyte generation. And of course, the gametophyte generation is quite reduced. It's now microscopic, only being able to be seen via microscope. So unlike the bryophytes and ferns, seed plants do not have a free-living gametophyte. It's microscopic. So of course, the female gametophyte is attached to, and of course dependent on, the sporophyte generation. Another thing to review on is, as I end the last chapter, you learn that some seedless vascular plants, of course, only produce, well, I'll say we're heterosporous, producing two types of spores. So, of course, here in the seed plants, all seed plants are heterosporous, producing two types of spores, meaning they have both microspores and megaspore. Meaning, I ended that last chapter, and I'll say it again, heterospory is that requirement for the production of seeds. So, as I get to, of course, where I'm going, keep in mind that, of course, seed plants produce ovules. A matured ovule is a seed. So when I refer to an ovule, it's a megasporangium surrounded by integuments. So those are layers of sporophyte tissue that, of course, enclose that megasporangium. After fertilization takes place, the ovule develops into the seed. Hence, I just said, a seed is nothing more than, of course, a matured ovule. And then, of course, the integuments will develop into the seed coat. So, next of which, of course, I'll get to the way in which seed plants have been botanically classified. And what I'm getting at here is, botanically, seed plants have been divided into two major groups, the gymnosperms and angiosperms. Before I get further into such, I'll now speak to a few of those differences seen in the two groups of those plants. So the gymno, naked, sperm, seed, gymnosperms are the naked seed plants. So of course those seeds are born exposed on scales of cones. There is no ovary wall that surrounds that ovule. Examples of gymnosperms include things such as the ginkgo, such as ginkgo biloba, the hemlock tree, the fir tree, spruce tree, and even the pine trees. Angiosperms. So of course that means the seed is enclosed in a vessel or a case. So of course the angiosperms, the flowering plants, produce seeds which are of course enclosed within a fruit. And to help you out, a fruit is a matured ovary. Thus, the ovules of the angiosperm are protected. So the flowering plants are quite diverse. There are many of those that haven't been discovered today, and it's an estimated over 300,000 angiosperm species. So of course it includes things such as the buttercups, which I know you all have seen, the palm trees. Yes, true palm trees, not the things that are planted and I guess we'll say not native to Baldwin County. Grasses, apples, the cactus, or cacti to be plural, the lilies, such as the lily of the valley, oaks, and even corn, which I mentioned I planted. And do keep in mind that both gymnosperms and angiosperms have vascular tissues. So very quick like, let's get to evolutionary adaptations for plants to live life on land. Quick like, I'll mention that the reduced gametophyte I've already mentioned. The ovules I've already mentioned. Heterospory I've already mentioned, and I'll get to pollen here shortly. But all of those four things, allowed plants to, of course, cope with life on land, life where it is dry. In other words, they allow for those plants to thrive in an area exposed to, of course, ultraviolet radiation. So they now, meaning since these plants are land plants, and of course they produce seeds, there is no longer a requirement of water for fertilization. Hence, these plants can live, of course, throughout the terrestrial environments. So, of course, again, is another photo of the seed. This shows those two embryonic leaves. This shows the two embryonic leaves there, the seed coat, and of course, the rest of which, such as that embryonic root, and thereafter the food supply, and I'll get more to this later. This is a bit of a review. I say that on your own, please take your time to review these things. I've gone through this already in the overview. This table I found, I decided to add this table because it puts a lot of information into, of course, one place. As you all see this, I'll say this. On the test, of course, there will not be a test for at least 2 weeks. But on the test, whenever the test is going to be, you all will describe the 4 extant groups of plants. In other words, you'll go through bryophytes, the seedless vascular plants, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. As you go through those, what you all will do is describe them completely, meaning what generation is dominant, what that means to have that dominant generation. Is that sporophyte that generation seen? Is that communophyte the generation that is seen? Does it require water for fertilization? Are those sperm flagellate? Does it produce pollen? How are those seeds or spores dispersed? Giving examples, meaning named examples of those things. So not just saying it's, I guess you say, a piece of grass, but say it's grass because grass is an angiosperm. It flowers and fruits. It produces pollen. Pollen is dispersed via the wind because it is a wind-pollinated plant. In other words, you'll describe them wholly, using, of course, what you've learned. I'll be honest. In this chart, the left-hand side of the chart is what you all now, I would say, should have mastered well. Right-hand side of the chart is where we're beginning now. And yes, that is that communophyte generation, which I say is quite small and reduced. Here, and of course, the ferns and their allies, the seedless vascular plants. So I spoke to, of course, the seed plants being heterospores, that requirement for producing what we call seeds. So of course it says the megasporangium produces megaspores to give rise to that female communophyte, as opposed to that microsporangium producing microspores to give rise to that male communophyte. So there will only be one functional megaspore, whereas there will be many, many, many functional microspores. I'll get back to that later on. So this goes from ovule to seed. It now gets quite specific in that it refers to gymnosperms. In gymnosperms, it states here to the far left-hand side, that this is an immature ovulate cone, not yet mature. So let's get to this portion here. What happens is the micropyle, that small portion, is an opening. Inside that opening, of course, what will go in is known as the pollen grain. Notice it's haploid. As that pollen grain enters into the micropyle, what then will happen is that pollen grain, which is also referred to as a immature male gametophyte, will develop, of course, and form a pollen tube. As a pollen tube forms, the sperm nucleus is discharged. As that sperm nucleus is discharged, of course, that egg nucleus and sperm can fuse to create, of course, what is called that new embryo, that new sporophyte generation, with, of course, everything that should be within a seed. In other words, it fertilizes the egg, and upon fertilization, of course, it transforms that ovule into that, of course, seed, with all of those parts I said that a seed contains. So this shows you a cross-section of a cone. What you have here, of course, is a mature cone. This is a female cone. I hope you do remember what a cone looks like from the genus Pinus. So that is a scale. And of course, this is that ovule, what will develop into, of course, the seed. Here, of course, shows an angiosperm. In this case, this came from the avocado. In this case, there is that seed enclosed within, of course, that fruit. How an avocado would taste right now. And here is the pollen. So I mentioned already, the microspore develops into a pollen grain that consists of that immature male gametophyte. So pollen grains are transported, I say, one of two ways, either A, by an animal, or B, via the wind. As, of course, it gets there, the transfer of pollen, of course, is referred to pollination. The sperm of seed plants require absolutely no water, no motility. And, of course, if that sperm fertilizes the egg, then, of course, the zygote will develop into that sporophyte embryo. So having done this, I won't review vascular and non-vascular plants at all. I'll say this presentation is also at Canvas, so if I go too fast, be sure to go back and reference it. So this, of course, shows where we have gone and where we're going. So where we're going now is to the gymnosperms by phylum. We'll go through Ginkgophyta, Cycadophyta, Gnetophyta, and Coniferophyta, and then end things with Anthophyta, the flowering plants known as angiosperms. So in your text, you can find this very same figure. I see it's a great way to contrast both gymnosperms and angiosperms. It gives you the growth habit, of course. Gymnosperms, they grow as woody trees and shrubs. They have tracheids to conduct in xylem. They reproduce by way of cones, the reproductive portion, as you all do see. The cones that are here, the cones that are there, and the cone that's there. And even the cones here, I almost forgot. Pollen transfer by way of wind. Of course, fertilization happens here. Egg, sperm, zygote, haploid, haploid, diploid. And of course, it says seeds are born exposed, or born on scales of cones. The nutritive material will be the female gametophyte. It estimates an approximate 840 species, and of course, it's worldwide. I contrast those with the angiosperms. The angiosperms might be herbaceous. If not herbaceous, they're woody, such as the woody dicots called trees. It says they have both vessel elements and tracheids. Hence, of course, it's hard wood. The absence of such make the gymnosperms provide us with soft wood, which I'll teach later. They are produced by way of flowers. Pollen grains are transferred by way of an animal pollinator or the wind. Fertilization happens twice, i.e., it's called double fertilization, which, of course, I'll also add to your homework on your test. The process of double fertilization. So you take, of course, an egg, which is haploid, sperm, which is haploid, and, of course, 2 polynuclei plus sperm. So you have A, the diploid zygote, plus B, the triploid endosperm. We'll do it later. Seeds are enclosed within fruit, derived from, of course, the ovary. Here, what's nutritive is known as the endosperm. It is well over 300,000 species of angiosperms, and they, of course, are found worldwide. So let's begin now with those 4 gymnosperm phyla. And, of course, using this phylogeny, which I do enjoy to see, the outgroup. The tree was rooted by way of the ferns and their allies. So we'll begin, of course, with the first synapomorphy being the evolution of seeds, and this is where we shall go. So that means everything after this point has seeds. Let us begin. So gymnosperms states that they are the naked seed plants. So we'll begin, of course, with their seeds born on those cones. They're called the modified leaves, i.e. sporophylls, on those strobili. So let's begin. Cycads from Cycadophyta. And do bear in mind, class, I cannot ask everything about every group. I am here to ensure that you all learn about these different groups of plants. Cycadophyta, the cycads. It's the next to the largest group of gymnosperms. They have large cones with palm-like leaves, but hey, they are not palm trees. They are not palm trees. And it's approximately 130 species, which I will never ask on a test. I knew you've seen these before. You may have called these, I think, sago palms, which they're not palms at all. They're just, of course, cycads from phylum Cycadophyta. So I have a picture of these. I know I took this photograph myself. This shows the male cone here. And of course, this shows another picture I took myself from here on campus. This is the male cone. If you ask, how do I know? Look beneath. There's pollen. Again, another photo I took here on campus of a cycad, phylum Cycadophyta. This shows the very same with the female cones. And the female cones would be, of course, that cone that produces the seeds. Next up is phylum Ginkgophyta. In this phylum, there's only one remaining species. They call it a living fossil. It's known as Ginkgo biloba. It has deciduous, fan-like leaves. Hence, I planted 2 of these trees at the Huff household, one on each side of the Huff's home. The leaves turn a very beautiful gold color in autumn, which I enjoy. But what makes this unique is these leaves are deciduous, which of course is unique for gymnosperms. As you look closely, it's a popular ornamental in cities because, of course, it can tolerate the conditions within cities. Meaning, I heard them once known as concrete jungles. Well, the concrete jungle, of course, is a place in which a ginkgo can thrive. And what I will say is a landscaper, typical of which would produce, well, would plant the plant that only produces pollen. They would not plant that plant that produces the fleshy seeds. So I just gave you a term there. Ginkgo biloba is known as being dioecious. Well, Ginkgo biloba is known as being dioecious. When I say that it is dioecious, I'm meaning that it has separate male and female plants. The male plant produces pollen. The female plant produces seed. In other words, the plants that I planted will produce, of course, only pollen because those rancid seeds, which I'll show now at the top right, are just that rancid. When I was at Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, they smelled so bad I would walk to class at an entirely different way to avoid those seeds. It's just that putrid. So if you ever plant a ginkgo, do not plant the one you see at the top right. On the left-hand side, it shows those fan-shaped leaves, and if you see one of these plants, hey, send me an email. Let me know. Again, of course, it's a close-up of that, of course, dioecious ginkgo biloba, meaning one produces the rancid-smelling seeds, and it does smell pretty bad, you all. I can almost smell the smell now. It's horrible. On the right-hand side, that huge, huge tree. Next up is phylum Netophyta. So netophytes include three genera, Netum, Ephedra, and Welwitschia. So these plants live in areas that are tropical and even those that are in desert, such as the Welwitschia. So it states, desert shrubs, sometimes known as Mormon tea, which I really won't call it, I'm referring to ephedra there, produce the compound ephedrine, which is used medicinally as a decongestant. If you have used it before, you likely do appreciate ephedra for the decongestant. In other words, if you look closely, ephedra, which is found here, the plant ephedra, from the genus Ephedra, it produces, of course, ephedrine. This is why, of course, it's hard to buy ephedrine and find ephedrine these days. The drug is quite potent. Hence, of course, it's protected. And I'll put it this way. If anyone ever offers you money to buy ephedrine or even pseudoephedrine, I recommend you never do it because you could go to jail for that. It is against the law. Netum is the top right. It is a tropical plant found, of course, in Asia and on the continent of Africa. No, those are not fruit. And then to the left, of course, is Welwitschia. There's only one species left. This one, of course, lives in the desert. I say that it lives in the desert, southwestern African desert. Again, on what is called the far right-hand side, this is Welwitschia. And, of course, the moisture from fog, of course, is what it uses. In the middle is ephedra, with B as in boy. And on the left-hand side of the screen is what is called netum. Last of which is phylum Coniferaophyta. This is the largest gymnosperm phylum, consisting of an approximate 600 species. The conifers are most amazing, I say. It includes, of course, firs, hemlocks, spruces, pines, redwoods. Well, I'll stop. Cypresses. All right, I'll stop. But these, class, are typical of very, very large trees. Pine trees are most amazing. They sometimes call the South the Pine Belt, or at least, of course, in Mississippi. But, of course, conifer species dominate those forested regions of the Northern Hemisphere, such as I showed you all when we watched Planet Earth together. Most conifers are evergreen, meaning that even in winter, sometimes known as the dead of winter, they go through the process of photosynthesis. Yes, they go through the process of photosynthesis, even with those needle-like leaves. Some conifers, such as the bald cypress and that redwood, called the dawn redwood, are deciduous trees, i.e., they lose their leaves. And of course, they come back thereafter. It was pretty amazing. I watched what is called a documentary. And via the said documentary, it mentioned that the redwood tree can grow 6 feet per year. And they had a camera that had been there, of course, throughout 12 months, and they showed the growth of that one tree. And it was utterly amazing to see a redwood tree grow that fast, that quickly. So, of course, to get back to where I was, what you're seeing here, of course, are both the male, excuse me, what you are seeing here are both the male and female cones. Microscopically, this is that pollen grain. This is a pollen grain. And of course, these are the air sacs. Sometimes students say that it reminds them of Mickey Mouse, the immature megametophyte dispersed via the wind. So what you're seeing to the top left would be the Sequoia. They call them giants. I'd love to go to California's Sequoia National Park, which I do plan to go. But it states these trees, as they get tall, they're well over 110 meters tall. And that is, I repeat, that is a person way down there. So it mentions that one of these weighs the equivalent of 24 blue whales, which of course is that largest animal on Earth, or 40,000 people. So it's one of the largest living organisms, and of course, the most ancient. Some of these, of course, have said to be up to 2,700 years old. If that's not old, I don't know what old is. And of course, when I mentioned that they can get tall, I was referring to those redwoods, meaning the coast redwoods can get to heights of up to 110 meters in height. How tall? How tall? I'll go to the far top right. So the Douglas fir, an evergreen tree, and this, of course, is pretty much what goes across the north reaches of this continent, and provides, of course, not just timber, but of course, oxygen for us. But many times, of course, this is what is used to frame homes. If you've seen a home being built in Baldwin, Mobile County, or even in Florida, Illinois, or I'll just say any state in the Union. At the bottom, I'll get to, of course, this species, Pinus gava, the bristlecone pine. It's found in the White Mountains of California. These include some of the oldest living organisms on Earth. If you ask how old, they're estimated to be over 4,600 years old. Now that's old. The tree that you see pictured here is known as Methuselah, because I think it's the world's oldest living tree. So, of course, they won't tell me or you where this tree is, and I think you all would know why. If you don't know why, just ask. What you see in the top right shows those needle-like leaves. These are needle-like leaves here, as opposed to these scale-like leaves here. Scale-like leaves versus needle-like leaves. So to end this lecture, all you need to hear with the way in which these species alternate generations. So yet again, you see the alternation generations. So I suppose I'll begin here with this newly germinated seedling. Thanks a lot, seed. So from this seed, we get the seedling. Eventually, there is this tree. Those male cones produce pollen. That's not a male cone. The male cones do produce pollen. But what you're seeing here is a female cone from the production, of course, this immature cone. And the immature cone, of course, takes time. You won't get a mature cone in just one season or 1 year. Thereafter, that immature cone, by way of the pollen produced from that male cone, thinks like wind that blows. So as that wind blows and provides that microspore, a way to become a loft, by way of that pollen grain you see here, the pollen grain you see here, eventually, of course, it gets into what is called that micropyle. The pollen tube grows, and of course, you get fertilization. Now, upon fertilization occurring, can we get this mature seed? And now we see this mature eyelet cone, the mature seed cone, as opposed to where I said earlier, that cone which was immature. The paper wings allow it to be dispersed, and there we have it. Class, that has been the alternation of generations, and of course the gymnosperms. We'll finish this lecture next week, and of course thereafter we'll get into the 34th chapter. Study well, take notes well, and if you have any questions, class, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you all for listening.